Welcome to the Finnish War, a Kriegsspiel AAR. The scenario was created by lead umpires KB and Dogpilot and replays the war between Sweden and Russia in 1808. Historically, the Swedish plan of war was designed around fortifications such as Sveaborg, the Gibraltar of the North. The Swedish High Command planned to move the land armies into Finland and wait for reinforcements from Sweden. It was believed that the Russian armies would be slowed trying to conquer the forts at Sveaborg and Svartholm. Part of the plan called for the Swedish coastal fleet to harass the Russians with landings of troops at vital points of the occupied territory. Here you see the orders of battle. To the left in blue are the Swedes. Their commander was Adlercreutz. The Swedes had 5 brigades of total 18,250 men. The Russians on the right in green were divided into 3 commands. The garrison commands had 2 divisions. 7 divisions were split between Kamensky and Toli. Notice that a division of Russians is 3,783 men and a brigade of Swedes is 3,650. So the relative strength was 9 versus 5. In the game scenario, the Swedish general Adlercreutz, who was played by Great Gold, planned a swift campaign with a decisive battle and naval support. He wants the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Brigade to attack the Russians at Kolayaki with the goal to encircle the enemy and compel their surrender. The 5th Brigade would head to Pipala in the east and capture it. The Russian commanders could not coordinate their plans. Kamensky, here in red, planned to retreat toward new defensive lines closer to his supply routes while engaging the Swedes in a fighting withdrawal. Toli, in orange, was situated further away from the action. He planned to link up with Kamensky's right flank. The garrisons were only allowed to stay in the towns that they inhabited. On May 6th, the Swedes with 10,000 men attacked the Russian 14th Division on the coast. They start with a fierce artillery barrage which lasts for an hour. Worried he was to be outflanked and cut off, the 14th Division's commanders, Demonov, orders a contingent to hold the enemy in place while the rest of the division attempts to escape. This doesn't work, and they surrender at 11 a.m. The Russian 22nd Division, under Hans, was en route to reinforce the 14th Division. Upon hearing the cease of the fighting, he decides to destroy the supply wagons and try to escape. This does not work, and they are forced to surrender as well. For the next 5 days, Kamensky tries to retreat south and gather reinforcements, while Adlercreutz considers his first victory and devises a new offensive plan. On May 8th, the Russian 5th nears Pipala, while Toli's corps advances toward the battle area. The Swedish 5th aims to catch the Russians by moving south. Adlercreutz orders columns to Karsamaki. The Swedish 4th remains on the coast near Kronoby. On May 11th, Adlercreutz intercepts Russian communications, learning about a Russian division at Pipala. He plans to decisively destroy it, as he had done with the Russian divisions on the coast. On the afternoon of May 13th, the Second Battle of Pipala commenced, as Swedish 2nd and 3rd Brigades moved to cross the Pipala River, facing off against the Russian 5th Division. Despite their numerical advantage, the Swedes faced Russians who held a strong tactical position in the town near a bridge. The Battle of Pipala. At 1700, the Swedes reached the town only to discover that the Russians had destroyed the bridges. The Swedes decide to build a pontoon bridge west of town. By 1830, the Russians begin bombarding the Swedes as they construct the bridge. Artillery starts a fire in town that quickly spreads. At 2015, the Swedes start crossing the bridge, but now a raging fire in the town pushes them back. Around 2045, the Russians launch a counterattack that forces the Swedes to flee back across the bridge, resulting in half of them being cut off and surrendering to the Russians. By 2115, the battle is over. At the conclusion of this battle, Adlercreutz reconsiders his approach to the campaign.
While the destruction of Russian commands is the quickest and most decisive way of tipping the scales in our favor, I must also realize that it is incredibly difficult or outright impossible when faced with opponents of even mild competence on such restrictive terrain. This hunger for decisive victory has cost us many irreplaceable men with nothing to show for it. The Russians used our desperation and greed to this end against us, to drive us into unfavorable, hasty engagements.
On May 16th, Tully arrives from the south and proceeds to attack the Swedes with the intent to rout them out of their camp. The Battle of Pipo. At 0800, the Russian commanders spot the Swedish forces through the trees and order their cavalry to attack along the road, aiming to disrupt the Swedish command. The Swedish cavalry pulls back, but the infantry holds and forces the Russians to retreat. Both sides deploy in similar formations, revealing that the Russian force is different from the one encountered at Pipola. Palmfeld ordered his artillery to suppress the enemy. The Russian 7th Division begins deploying south, and the Russian 8th Division north. The Russian artillery quickly depletes its ammunition, inflicting moderate casualties on the Swedish front line. By 0900, the Swedish right wing attack force is prepared and launched, though it makes little impact. 4 Swedish half battalions are routed in 15 minutes without achieving any significant gains. The Swedish army is in a dire situation with chaotic formations in the marshes and being low on artillery ammunition. Palmfeld believes the Russian line is thin and orders a bayonet charge. The Swedish charge faces heavy enemy fire and breaks before even reaching the Russians. As the Swedes retreat, the Russians launch an all-out infantry and cavalry attack. The Swedish rearguard resists, but eventually surrenders when Russian forces appear from the right and rear. The 7th Russian Division spreads out on the left to capture and eliminate fleeing Swedes. An aide-de-camp from Tully approaches Palmfeld to negotiate a Swedish surrender. The surrender of the 1st and 3rd Brigades seals the fate of the Swedish campaign. Adlercreutz decides not to surrender immediately and opts for one last consolidation and battle. The Battle of Kar-Samaki. Adlercreutz brings up the 2nd Brigade and orders them to retreat to the coast. Tully's forces march on Kar-Samaki on the 18th of May. The Swedish forces have received information that the Russians are approaching from the east. They decide to take a gamble and continue north. When the two forces collide, Russian and Swedish cavalry clash, with the Swedes fleeing in panic. The Russian cavalry goes on to slow the progress of the Swedish infantry. The Swedes try to push through, but they fail. They then attempt to bypass the enemy, but the Russians extend their own line to prevent this. A Swedish cavalry charge against the artillery fails. The Russians reform their cavalry and scatter the Swedes. Many Swedes surrender, while Adlercreutz and Dobeln attempt a final charge against the Russian cavalry, resulting in their deaths. This concludes the scenario. On behalf of lead umpires KB and Dogpilot, thank you for watching this after-action review of the Finnish War. This is Umpire Lafondios, and it's been my pleasure to prepare this video. We hope you learned a lot, and we'll see you out there on the Kriegsspiel board.